Hey, so you want to burn some fat? Welcome to the club. I'm not going to stand here and tell you a quick way. I want to explain the science on how your body actually utilizes fat so that you can understand some of my other videos and understand how fat loss really works in the body without having to go and sit through 6 semesters of boring biology class. Let's summarize it in just a few minutes. So the first thing we have to look at is lipolysis. And lipolysis is ultimately the mobilization of fat so that we can essentially use it. Now I want you to think of fat loss and lipolysis in really 2 steps. First and foremost, we have fat stored up in a muscle cell. First thing we need to do is we need to get that fat out of the cell and into the bloodstream. Then step 2, we need to learn how to utilize that fat. Once it's in the bloodstream, how do we get the body to use that as a fuel source rather than protein or carbohydrates? That's how we're ultimately going to burn fat. But let's dive in a little bit on how a fat cell is structured and how that works. You see, a fat cell is about 15% lean mass, usually the structure of the cell, and 85% stored fat in the form of a lipid droplet, basically just stored fat molecules, also known as a triglyceride. So what we need to do is we need to get that fat to cross through that cell membrane and into the bloodstream. The process of doing that in general is lipolysis in and of itself. It is the mobilization of fat out of the cell and into the bloodstream. Now, how we actually get that fat out of the cell comes down to the activity of an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to call it lipase. And what this enzyme lipase ultimately does is it tells the triglycerides, which are the stored fats in that muscle cell, to break apart from a glycerol molecule so that they can essentially pass through the membrane. Basically, it's deconstructing the fat just enough that it can squeeze through the membrane and get into the bloodstream and ultimately be in the form of fatty acids that we can utilize. Now the thing is, in order to produce this lipase, we need to have a lower level of insulin. We need to look at the balance between insulin and lipase. When our insulin levels are high, let's say because we ate carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are what we need to be the most concerned with when it comes down to insulin. If our insulin levels are higher, then our body is not secreting lipase as much, which means that those triglycerides are going to stay there in the form of triglycerides. They're just going to camp out and they're never going to cross that membrane and they're never going to get mobilized. Your body is just by preference going to run on glucose and just leave the fat stored there. If we're trying to burn fat, we really don't want that. So there's ways that we can kind of work that system and manipulate it a little bit. But before we really go into that, we have to understand a basic knowledge of what's called the Krebs Cycle. The Krebs Cycle, again, biology 101, nutrition 101, but it's kind of boring, kind of annoying. So basically, I'm going to explain it in brief. What the Krebs Cycle is the conversion of food, protein, carbs, or fats, ultimately into energy. And the way it does that is it converts all these energies into what is called acetyl coenzyme A. Acetyl-CoA. I want you to think of acetyl-CoA as sort of the hub for creating all energy, whether it's going to be from protein, from fats, or from carbs. When we eat carbs, it's much easier for our body to convert that into that acetyl-CoA and ultimately create energy. So from a matter of preference, it's going to opt for that, especially when carbohydrates are the most prevalent in the diet. But, and this is a big but, acetyl-CoA can easily be created from fats as well. So let's back up a second. We have fat stored in the cell. Lipase activates the fat to cross into the bloodstream. Now we have fatty acids floating through the bloodstream. Well, the good news is if we have the diet oriented in such a way, that fat that's in the bloodstream can actually be converted into acetyl-CoA, which means it can be converted into energy. Voila, you're utilizing fat for energy. That's the purpose here. Now, it does come with some diet restrictions. That's where the whole idea of a low-carb diet comes from. If you deprive your body of glucose, eventually it's going to want to run on fats a little bit more often. This is called becoming keto adapted. And we can go into another video talking about ketosis at another time. But if you convince your body to ultimately run on fats, you can trigger more lipase, activate the release of more lipids, and get more actual fat loss. This has just been a long, convoluted way of saying get fat out of the cell, into the bloodstream, and utilized. So what are 3 quick ways that you can get the most out of lipolysis? One is going to be eat less frequently. Every time you eat, you're secreting insulin. When you're secreting insulin, you're not releasing lipase. When you're not releasing lipase, you're not utilizing fat. The next one is going to be simply eating a low-carb diet. Now, I'm not a dietitian and I'm not a doctor, so I can't prescribe for you to exactly eat a low-carb diet. But I can say that's what I see as being ultimately the most successful, because you're not having these massive spikes in insulin. You're able to control that lipase more. Now lastly, for those of us that work out, you don't need to constantly be eating carbs after your workout. The general fitness community will tell you to carb up after a workout. Well, if you're trying to burn fat, you want to keep those insulin levels a little bit lower so that your body triggers lipase and is forced to convert that fat into acetyl-CoA and energy, rather than just preferentially using carbs. So there you have it, a quick synopsis on how fat metabolism works in the body. If you like this video, let me know and I can go into some more detail and break it down even more to how it works during the time of day, how it works from person to person, and how you can ultimately manipulate the most out of your diet to get the best possible effect. See you in the next video.